This video was recommended to me by some people in chat who said it's very, very good. Basically, one of the frustrations I've had for a long time and that I've expressed on stream, and I didn't know this video existed, but it seems to argue for the similar thing, is basically that it feels like a lot of developers and publishers nowadays rely on things like upscalers, rely on things like frame generation, rely on things like FSR, whatever, to hit frame rate and resolution targets that should be the minimum. So if the resolution target is, say, 1440p at 30, and then they'll upscale it to 4K 30. It seems like a lot of studios are using the upscalers to get to that level without just hitting the native goal. Like they're relying or using these upscalers and these other techs as a crutch instead of optimizing the game fully to where it needs to be. And to be clear, this isn't necessarily just because of the developers being, lazy or taking shortcuts. Usually this is because the publishers are not giving them enough time to polish the game to that point, so they just have to get it out the door. A great example would be like Star Wars Jedi Survivor, a really, really, really good game, but that game ran like garbage when it launched, really unfortunately so. And part of the reason it ran like garbage was because of its over-reliance on upscalers like FSR that just made everything look really muddy. It wasn't optimized well enough, so when you got into open world sections, it ran like garbage. They've patched it. Apparently it's way better now, but that was a huge problem when it first launched. And this video kind of outlines similar stuff, and funnily enough, has an entire chapter titled Why Epic Games and Unreal Engine is the Biggest Problem. So let's see what they have to say. This is from Threat Interactive, and let's see what they've got.
Is an investigative report addressing the most negative aspects affecting modern game development, specifically the deterioration of realistic graphics and the manufactured increase in computing cost.
And I was gonna make a joke about people being made ugly or like Sweet Baby or something. It's not even funny anymore. It's just this is where we are.
I am Kevin Jimenez, the founder of Threat Interactive, a new game production studio aiming to unlock the full potential this next generation of gaming can provide. And we'll show just how by the end of this video. There are three interconnected factors that need to be addressed: creativity, performance, and visuals. Let's begin with creativity. Several videos online are already bringing awareness to the decreasing quality of gameplay, open worlds, and the microtransactions affecting the majority of games.
The two biggest video game makers in America now make most of their money not from people buying games, but on subscriptions and spending within those games.
In fact, Electronic Arts and Take-Two Interactive both make a staggering 75% of their money from what's called microtransactions.
However, I personally loathe the popular critique that photorealistic games are not fun, they lack art style, and we need worse graphics to fix it. This defeatist attitude is a byproduct of modern development, not visual progress. As industry game developer veterans put it, one thing you do is 10 things you don't. Currently, graphics dominate the do list, leaving gameplay and art style in the don't category.
That's a good way of putting it. One thing you do is 10 things you don't. I like that. That's really succinct. It's like what Todd Howard used to say in all those interviews he would give in the development of like Skyrim and Fallout 3 and stuff, where he said, we can do anything, we just can't do everything. And I think that that's the same vibe that's basically being put forward here, is that you can do a lot, but every time you choose to pursue a specific course, you are sacrificing other things that get left behind.
Graphics are currently in a chaotic state, but once the entire developer industry can easily create highly performant photorealism within their engines, competition can begin to solely focus on art direction and gameplay. But recent opportunities for outstanding games with captivating stories and incredible gameplay have been tarnished by the next two factors. 30 FPS on next-gen consoles is unacceptable for many reasons. It appears choppy and promotes a reliance on accessibility such as motion blur. 30 FPS also induces extreme judder and motion on numerous screens. With only 30 frames, the quality of gameplay logic and basic responsiveness falls short, especially when tons of other titles offer that same basic responsiveness. There are numerous 8th generation console titles that ran near photorealistic visuals at 60 FPS, and that was on 2013 2 teraflop hardware, so 30 FPS titles like Spider-Man PS4 are kind of excused here. But modern studios are churning out these half-baked games with absurd requirements, creating an illusion that 13 teraflop 2021 architecture isn't powerful enough for basic photorealistic performance standards set years ago.
And I think that's the most jarring thing, is that, like, to a certain extent, I think a lot of people have felt deceived coming out of the PS4 era into the PS5 era. It's like, we paid for all new hardware, all these new consoles that are on paper way more powerful, but it doesn't feel like the leap has been there. And I understand like the argument that it's just diminishing marginal returns, that as time goes by, you know, it's if you look at it as just a line, if this was like the original PlayStation, the PS2 is a huge leap, you know, it's massive. The PS3 is maybe a smaller leap, but it's still pretty significant. The leap then to the PS4 is maybe to here, so it's again a good jump, but not that big. And then the leap to the PS5 is even smaller. I understand that we're talking about diminishing marginal improvements. I get that. But it also doesn't change the fact that it feels like we should see at least some improvement. But in a lot of cases, it feels like games are running worse and looking worse. I feel like Forspoken looks worse than almost all of those other games that came out 10 years ago. It ran worse. Gotham Knights as well. Jedi Survivor definitely ran worse. When it was fixed, it started looking better, but it definitely did not look that great at launch. RoboCop, I think, was fine, but it's been a minute since I looked at it. Alan Wake 2, also a really good-looking game, but as for all these other ones, yeah, I can see that.
This leads us to our final issue. The basic standard of 60 FPS is only offered at the cost of our next and biggest problem: visuals. I firmly advocate for photorealism, but the industry is advancing in it in a manner that is worthless during basic movement, through a cancer in real-time rendering. A graphics programming scapegoat that is destroying every game in its path. It's called TAA, and that stands for temporal anti-aliasing. And this includes upscalers. There are great videos trying to bring awareness about this, but Digital Foundry has an ignorant video that is quickly spreading inaccurate information that is damaging real-time rendering. I will expose false narratives as I show why TAA has ruined modern optimization trends in conjunction with an abusive use of the power offered in current generation consoles. Okay. TAA and upscalers stem from anti-aliasing.
Old school Linus. Wow. That's like getting hit in the face with a bucket of cold ice water. Wow, Linus. Oh, old school Linus is something else, man. I remember watching these videos. Remember when he was still making them in that house that they had rented, and it was just a house in some neighborhood, but they had their whole studio based out of it. That's when I got into Linus Tech Tips, way back in the day, before the new studio, before everything. And now, you know, it's very corporate and professional, but those were the days, man. He used to film videos in just a straight up kitchen, like on the kitchen island. It was great.
That aim to mimic the benefits of 4K plus rendering, because 4K 60 FPS on affordable hardware, including that generation consoles, isn't feasible. True 4K or higher rendering ensures smooth edges on objects, better sampling on textures, thin objects, and specular highlights. As you decrease the resolution, stair-stepping aliasing emerges, and thin details on meshes and specular highlighting breaks apart. FXA addresses stair-stepping for a cheap cost, but introduces noticeable blur on the entire image.
Yeah, it just kind of smooths everything out. For sure. I mean, one of the perks of 4K, at least in theory, is that once you hit 4K, on smaller displays, you probably don't even need to do any extra anti-aliasing because the resolution's just high enough that it can smooth it out just natively. But as screens have gotten bigger, that's also become a problem because you can still spot it.
SMAA eliminates these same edges without any blur, making it much more superior. In fact, the only advantage 4K downsampled to 1080p versus 1080p with just SMAA applied is thin detail and specular sampling. But modern TAA is designed to run at any resolution by jittering the rendering view in 8 or more positions as frames are generated. After pixel reprojection logic is calculated and designed, the past frames are combined, creating an 8K-like resolution addressing thin, undersampled objects and specular highlighting. But all versions of these designs have several issues. Temporal designs are destructive to object or character motion within view. The problems I'm about to show aren't usually visible under a slower threshold of motion, which is why the industry markets with slow cinematic trailers or graphical showcases. But motion produced from gameplay gets annihilated with ghosting, blur, and smearing visuals.
Yeah, gross! Ew, gross, stinky! Look at the line, the ghosting. This was part of the problem with it. It's also like all these games that have dense grass and stuff, we have better like memory capacity on modern consoles and stuff. So you see grasses like and foliage being cranked up, but these upscaling techniques and anti-aliasing techniques cannot handle it. And so it just makes it look like you're walking in a field of smushed kale.
This is why still or slow image quality comparisons by major tech influencers are both worthless and misleading. What's the point in playing a realistic game that looks like this during basic player interactions? YouTube compression conveniently hides these effects of TAA and is usually mistaken for video compression artifacts.
This is why I go through these trailers and pause them and point out these things, like in that Crimson Desert video we just looked at, where we pause it, we zoom in, enhance, and look at it. Because like it's something, when it's in a compressed YouTube video, you might not notice, but when you play the game, when you have your hands on the controller, you will notice it. It is something that you'll pick up on. So, you know, these videos are filmed, edited, and presented in the way that covers it up as best they can, because they of course don't want to focus on the downsides of the current game and how it looks and runs. But it's important, if you're going to spend $70 freaking on something, that you be aware of it at least.
The 4K on YouTube resembles native uncompressed 1080p more than actual native uncompressed 4K. Chances are you're playing games through an HDMI or better, meaning your game's image quality is uncompressed. Temporal solutions and motion degrade resolution similar to low bitrate video compression. So having TAA on your gameplay is like adding compression to your gaming experience. Because of current hardware prices that aren't changing anytime soon, 1080p and 1440p remain the most consumer-friendly target resolutions.
Oh my god, dude. Look at that. Look at that monstrosity. Oh! Look dead center of the frame. Look at that ghosting, man. Oh my god. Man.
But TAA ruins these resolutions the most. TAA and upscalers not only ruin affordable gaming resolutions, but also damage luxury resolutions for those with enthusiast-grade graphic GPUs. TAA and upscalers are often bundled with ugly sharpeners that fail to fix ghosting or restore the original clarity and detail stripped away from smearing. The FTAA subreddit, up until the creation of the r/motion clarity subreddit, remained the only online community where consumers could finally speak loud against the industry's oxymoron stance on realistic graphics, and they've listed hundreds of games with forced TAA, with recent titles throwing out traditional AA options for upscaling methods only. Remember the SMAA versus 4K comparisons earlier? You could get the same sampling quality on thin and specular by reusing a single pass frame, which means long ghosting trails, blur, and smearing could be eliminated. I personally compiled several pieces of data showing these temporal methods could be redesigned.
Dude, there's an entire subreddit named that. That's great. Oh, that's funny. There's an entire subreddit dedicated to it. That's funny.
Designed to prevent all these hideous motion issues, which are listed in the video description. But clear and good TAA will never become mainstream because the smeary nature of current temporal solutions are being exploited to cover up lazy and cheap development practices. In hundreds of game titles, if you can fully disable temporal solutions, you are punished severely with numerous rendering problems. Temporal dithering and frame blending dependent rendering aspects. Bloom. Soft shadows. Denoise replacement for ray trace shadows. Ambient occlusion. Screen space contact shadows. Vegetation, fur, hair. Screen space reflections. Global illumination. Translucent materials. Clouds. Dithering to hide geometric camera clipping. Mesh introductions. And ray trace reflections. Strip away TAA in several engines and these effects transform into an incomprehensible mess or reveal a poor approach to an aspect of rendering. These are the supposed fixes and optimizations offered by temporal anti-aliasing and upscalers. But an industry lie perpetuated by Digital Foundry's TAA video is the claim that TAA and upscalers enable developers to optimize these effects by rendering them at lower resolutions, allowing TAA to smooth them with supposedly no cost. But if you do some digging, you'll discover older deferred titles from under a decade ago, rendering the same basic effects independently of temporal frame smearing with similar or better performance and or similar better visual quality. And guess what? If you need extra performance from a demanding feature, that feature can be programmed to run at a lower resolution and or include its own temporal accumulation without blurring the entire frame. Modern implementations of last gen's basic visuals perform more poorly because studios leverage the power of 9th generation consoles to cut financial costs on legitimate optimization processes for faster releases. The financial...
Which checks out. I mean, especially when you consider how expensive the current development processes are, that they're still this expensive even with corners being cut like this. You know, it's pretty remarkable.
Savings don't end there though. TAA and upscalers enable studios to save money by integrating these popular and fully developed temporal algorithms into their engines instead of investing in the development of genuinely high-performing and self-resolving effects. Since TAA, a large portion of rendering advancement papers tie in TAA or mention an upscaler such as DLSS as a required condition to solve some issue with the design. Speaking of DLSS, people only label it better than native because DLSS is always compared to native with TAA applied. Anything compared to the worst case scenario will appear improved. The so-called best TAA algorithms are needlessly expensive and brand specific. First, I have a bone to pick with DLAA. DLAA uses too many pass frames for reconstruction, which causes two problems: long ghosting trails and significant blurring in motion compared to native with SMA or stationary output. It also fails to smooth stair-stepping in motion compared to SMAA. Applying Circus Method with the newest DLL provides much better results, even though both examples are rendered at 1080p. But Circus Method isn't cheap. DLA at 1080p on a desktop 12GB 3060 costs 0.75 milliseconds. Circus Method bumps it up to 2.44 milliseconds. Image quality is far from poor, but its proprietary nature, cost, and Blue Moon AI mistakes makes it unreliable for the industry. XeSS 1.3 native AA mode suffers from the same problems as DLAA, but costs 1.44 milliseconds at 1080p on the same machine. Applying Circus Method gets image quality almost indistinguishable from Circus Method DLSS, but costs 4.6 milliseconds.
Jesus.
Next is Unreal's TSR. It's a little more complex because it implements Circus Method natively, but I give it the fairest shot possible by using UE 5.4's more optimized implementation. It's easy to appear superior to Unreal's TAA, but TSR suffers from a specific hazy fizzle appearance that video compression doesn't present well enough to pair with my criticism of that aspect. But besides whether or not you think it looks fine or not, the biggest issue again is the cost when set by the maximum quality settings for anti-aliasing. It puts TSR 10 times the cost of TAA and stands around 3 milliseconds on a 3060 at native 1080p. That's the difference between 60 FPS and 50 FPS. Still not convinced it's too expensive? Let's look at the DCIMA TAA again from 2017. These are PS4 timings, and they didn't go with SMA because of the cost combined with temporal reprojection, so they went with a sharpened FXAA fallback for their 2-frame TAA instead. But what if they used SMAA instead? We would get 0.36 milliseconds versus both unreasonable TSR timings. With such a low base cost, and these results at 30 FPS, if we wanted to keep AAA cost under 1 millisecond on modern affordable hardware, we could catapult the quality even further with 60 FPS and use that 0.73 milliseconds of headroom with aspects such as SMA or advanced motion vectors. Meanwhile, if TSR was put under the same scenario on screen, I guarantee you it would look like its slime show even at 60 FPS. These are TAA design requisites that must be combined to keep TAA computations costs low and stop it from producing the poor image quality we've settled for more than a decade now. But effect dependency is preventing progress.
And part of this is like, once it becomes a standard, there's not much to like revolutionize it. Because I mean, the average, again, the average gamer, are they really going to notice this type of thing? Like, they're probably like, it looks a little, it doesn't look that great, or it doesn't run that great, or it's a little blurrier. But I think the average gamer is probably not picking up on a lot of this, which is why they can get away with it, basically. Again, this is Threat Interactive. I see you asking who it was. It's Threat Interactive on YouTube.
Unreal has long been founded on this dependency, and still heavily does. UE5 is set to worsen this industry problem because it's going to dominate the production of titles coming this generation, and Epic and its partners like CD Projekt Red have no concern over this matter. The Unreal documentation goes so far to claim that FXAA results in a loss of fidelity compared to their temporal methods, which you should be aware by now is only a half-truth. They also provide misleading information about TSR, presenting it as a method to achieve near 4K quality with just 1080p input. Of course, they showcase this with a stationary example. In reality, 540p with sufficient temporal jitter and accumulation can resolve an 8K resolution image with a stationary camera. Out of context fairy tales like this are damaging game development.
Yeah, it's the old saying from Mark Twain, I believe, which was there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And with a lot of this stuff, like you can find any collection of data to prove your point. if you twist it and bend it just enough where it's like, see, this side by side, it looks way better than just rendering natively. Which it's like, yeah, well, it's a still frame. And when you're actually playing the video game and things are in motion, it's not going to look significantly better than if you were rendering natively. Like, it's not going to retain detail. It's not going to enhance detail. It's not going to do any of that because it introduces all these other cascading artifacts and things. But, you know, when this is the standard, this is just what everybody's doing. And it becomes the meta.
Another out of context narrative Epic Games is pushing is that Nanite has a faster way to render geometry and aims to eliminate the LOD pop-in association. Nanite does not increase performance unless you abuse your scene with extreme overdraw. I've compiled many tests on the specific Unreal forums thread that proves this. Nanite can cost as much as next-gen lighting, and pop-in will still remain a part of your gaming experience because shadows, skeletal meshes, foliage, and open-world partitions will still introduce pop. Even Brian Karras has stated Nanite can have worse performance on optimized meshes, but stated users still enable it to save disk space. This comment is a perfect example showing Epic Games' flawed position on what modern games really need. It doesn't matter if your highly detailed open world game is 100 megabytes, but can't perform at a decent resolution and frame rate. Optimized meshes don't even require nanite compression, but studios who use nanite save themselves money by not investing in quality LODs, and not investing in mesh introduction transitional effects that would give you better results. A good practice used on optimized game meshes is the use of bitmaps for subpixel detail, such as the words on these quixel stones. Nanite encourages and is designed to render subpixel detail geometrically instead of textures, which causes extreme pixel crawl and artifacting, which, you guessed it, can only be fixed by intense temporal frame smearing, creating a manufactured and limited scenario where flawed TAA appears as a better option. I understand the time and quality issues related to making good LODs, but Nanite is the worst solution to this problem. UE5.
It is kind of funny that so much of this stuff nowadays is like, yeah, well, we're going to retain the quality with things like Nanite, but then we're just going to fix it by blurring everything and smearing it so that it looks better, I guess. Like it's just, it's funny how they create a problem in their attempt to solve a different one, and then they fix it by undoing the solution that they just produced. You know,
I will dominate all other options because this engine excels in support. I'm talking asset packages formatted specifically for Unreal, hundreds of documentations, shared public content, overwhelming logic support. Epic Games provides hundreds of free, basic, but high-quality assets when you use Unreal. Every major third-party vendor with game-related software always prioritizes support for Unreal. Unreal offers a unique amount of support for critical tools for basic workflows like animation and debuggers. It's intuitive to use in comparison with competitor UI and programming designs. For studios, finding individuals to hire is made easy due to the widespread popularity and adoption of the engine.
mm-hmm.
It's
also part of the reason that companies like CDPR are looking at it, because talent is like one of the biggest things that people just don't talk about in the games industry right now. Like, it's something Mark Alexis Cotier in that talk just a couple of weeks ago mentioned. He was like, right now it is extremely difficult to find the qualified talent that has histories of releasing games. Like, they're not out there looking for jobs. Either they have a good job at a big studio and they haven't left yet because they're senior, or they've gone off and founded their own studio and are working independently. Like, it's really tough to find experienced talent. So one of the ways these companies are finding ways to acquire new talent is by like hiring people right out of college that are familiar with Unreal Engine, and then they get them when they're fresh out of school, and then they build them up into the talent that they need, which they can do quicker because Unreal Engine is so familiar to people. They don't have to spend 6 months or a year teaching people how to use their tools. It's like that other interview we watched with Will Shen, the former Quest director, I believe was his title, with Bethesda Game Studios. And he said that he was spending a lot of time making tutorials, using OBS to make tutorial videos teaching people at the studio, new hires, how to use the creation engine and their tool set, which is an insane thing when you think about it. Using an amazingly like qualified guy, having him spend his time making video tutorials on how to use their tools, that's insane. What a waste of his talent, right? Versus just using a tool set people already know how to use, which saves everybody time, right? So there's like a bunch of benefits to using a tool set like this, but there's also downsides as they're outlining.
Advantage Unreal has acquired by simply existing as long as it has the way it has. That makes it the go-to for software and digital media. But the engine designs and its leadership should not be at the forefront of next-gen graphics development for critical reasons I'll outline right now. Epic provides 30 FPS presets in Unreal because they don't believe it's inadequate on 9th generation consoles. Look at Fortnite 5.4's performance. The design is CPU intensive, sure, but the art style is simplistic enough to, even with GI, it should provide a computational advantage. Yet it's one of the hardest games to run on the GPU side, even with a 60 FPS or high preset enabled. If this is the best performance offered by the engine's creators, of course they'll defend 30 FPS when basic realism or complex stylized visuals come into play. Epic has no experience making realistic games. The Matrix Awakens is not a game. It's a visually exciting 30 FPS demo with enough motion blur to hide the 30 FPS screen judder. Consumers who didn't own a 9th generation console at the time saw the 60 FPS tag on the YouTube presentation and assumed that was the case. People who did experience the demo firsthand were given basic interaction through a locked aiming system that wouldn't expose the fluidity issues of 30 FPS.
It's very sneaky, isn't it? It's very sneaky. I see what you're doing.
Epic has no problem abusing the flaws of their TAA or temporal upscalers such as DLSS for several effects I've shown throughout this video. Epic defaults their engine to rely on temporal smearing when very few TAA independent features remain undocumented and hidden behind loopholes most unsuspecting developers will never find. They shamelessly promote heavy and blurry temporal upscaling as a viable solution on 9th generation consoles. And the biggest problem with Epic and their perspective on game development is that Fortnite drives their motivations for Unreal's development. Fortnite is a game with a very unique and uncommon problem the engine has to accommodate for. It's an open world map with a dynamic time of day and weather. This means real-time GPU calculations need to be computed per frame to account for those dynamic changes. What makes these calculations so much more expensive in Unreal is the fact that Fortnite's entire environment is destructible. This is why more realistic open worlds from 8th generation console titles have no problem with day or weather cycles even though they don't use light maps. Because their environment, or in other words primary source of indirect lighting, is mostly static. These games use lighting solutions that bait small, memory-efficient indirect lighting hints that your GPU doesn't have to compute. This way your GPU just calculates how these pre-computed hints correlate to the dynamic lights and shadows.
This is one thing that was huge in the PS4 era that is not really, as far as I understand it, that common nowadays, was that so many of these games from that era baked in a ton of the detail, like a lot of it. There was, of course, Last of Us Part 2 is probably the most common example people have brought up of just a very beautiful game running on, again, 2013 hardware. And this would be considered phenomenal graphics for a 2024 game. If something came out like this, it would probably be one of the best looking games of the year. And this was running on 2013 hardware. Okay, like that's crazy. Technically, I guess this was probably 2016 hardware because it's running on the PS4 Pro, but still, I mean, wildly impressive graphically. But it's because they were able to bake in a ton of stuff, and it's also a proprietary engine that is custom built for that. But it's just, I think with a lot of this stuff, it's I hadn't really thought of it before, but I think it is absolutely true that Unreal is building Epic first and foremost with Fortnite in mind. So they build the engine to excel at that very specific use case. But a lot of these companies that are using it are not using it in the way that Fortnite uses the engine. They don't build it the same way. And so a lot of those optimizations and specializations for Unreal Engine aren't really utilized. And so you suffer all the downsides without any of the upside.
These lighting systems have their own limitations, but not a whole lot that can't be accelerated or overcome using 9th gen's hardware full potential. Fortnite's GI, which is Unreal's Lumen, can't let developers with the common environmental properties bake any high-quality indirect lighting hints that save you performance. Unreal's light maps are uninterpolatable and have serious leaking problems that can only be mitigated with stupid amounts of VRAM memory. So many Unreal games are wasting performance for basic visual standards because your GPU is computer whether or not a Fortnite wall has been destroyed or what that wall looks like, etc. Lumen is noisy without TAA because it isn't designed to use stable or high-quality indirect lighting hints. So top that inefficiency off in games with other Epic game technologies like Nanite, Virtual Shadow Maps, and TSR, and we're left with games created faster than ever and as inefficient and as terrible in motion as ever. When this happens over and over again, it standardizes, which is why other studios are following these inefficient designs for their mostly static games that could use faster systems. Epic Games' indifference towards underperforming or poor visuals that appear in third-party Unreal games is the statement that big budget studios should be customizing Unreal source code to provide more appropriate designs for their titles. True, but it's almost a catch-22. If a studio decides to use Unreal, it shows they lack the funding, interest, and/or innovation to manage the graphics themselves. This is exactly what happens when established studios throw out proprietary engines in favor of what Unreal offers. I have one more problem with Epic that I need to cover. Unreal is used for the automotive, film, simulation, and construction industries. That wouldn't be a problem if Epic wasn't constantly accounting for this user base and muddling Unreal with algorithms not meant for consumer-efficient real-time rendering. Amidst of these issues, I gave Epic the benefit of the doubt and made a feedback thread on the Unreal developer forums 12 months ago, requesting the prioritization of game development and a larger focus on temporal smearing independence within their various effects. In only 11 months, it was voted as the #1 feedback from developers, replacing the previous #1 feedback thread made 3 years ago. Epic released several Unreal versions, including nothing pertaining to the thread's request, despite a solid number of educated developers ready to progress beyond Epic's limited vision for this generation of games.
They're like, please, listen to us, please. Epic's like, no.
Gaming. This studio was created to begin the production of an intense action game based on a new IP consisting over 700 pages of detailed story and scenarios. Our game is conventional due to only requiring a mostly static world with dynamic lights, making our goals much more relevant to many developers and gamers. We have paused the production of our game, so our unrivaled passion for motion clarity and performance standards for untainted photorealism can be met, which is why our solution is to create a custom Unreal via crowdfunding with custom systems that directly address the giant issues stated in this video.
Yeah, and I think they could get there. Basically, Thread Interactive, they do they're making a game, but they use their expertise to make these videos, breaking it down, and it's very valuable insights. I mean, my hope is, of course, that Epic wakes up and pays attention to the feedback from a lot of devs. But this has been, the old problem where a lot of these games have stereotypical problems, which you can always point to and be like, oh, well, it's an Unreal Engine game. Oh, it's got terrible stutter when you enter new areas or with new effects because it didn't compilate shaders and things, or compilate. Did I just use that word? Compile. That's the word. So there's plenty of stuff to poke holes in and plenty of stuff to look at, but hopefully Epic just listens to it and devote some resources to it. My other hope is with companies like CDPR partnering with them. CDPR, which pretty clearly has a very capable staff of engineers that worked on their Red engine for years. My hope is that they can go to Epic and be like, listen, we got to fix this. We got to do that. We got to do this. We got to do that. And that they can help enhance the engine to work better for these types of games. That's my hope. Worst case scenario is that they work on it and it just, The Witcher 4 ends up having problems very similar to every other Epic game where it's like it runs good at 30 FPS because you can kind of motion blur away a lot of the problems, but anything beyond that, it really struggles. I hope that's not the case. I hope they can work on it and improve it, but time will tell. Please summarize the video. Basically, there is a consensus with a lot of these developers across the industry with different engines, different technologies and solutions for their rendering pipelines, that they can use temporal solutions to fix issues within the image to hit certain frame rate targets. Yeah, anyway, but as for the video, again, it's the temporal solutions have some benefits, but most of it is downsides. And with so many companies moving over to Unreal Engine, which has an over-reliance on temporal solutions to smooth out a lot of other problems, it's creating an industry standard which is not good and which people should not be okay with because it creates that standard Unreal Engine performance issue. It creates issues that will echo across many, many releases. And because Epic's doing it and so many other companies are using Epic, or using Unreal Engine, a lot of studios are just getting used to it. There's other problems with other solutions like DLSS, and these other upscalers that don't actually deal with the optimization issues. They are just a patchwork over the problem, and they're hoping that gamers don't notice. And I think eventually they will notice. What happened to Unity? What didn't happen to Unity? Unity has lots of problems themselves. Most of Unity's problems were executive led, where basically they had extremely greedy means of trying to monetize it. They moved it from charging you royalties based on like how much money you're generating, they tried to rework it into per install. So if you had a mobile game installed, you would have to pay for that. If you had demos installed, you'd have to pay for that. Like, it would basically bankrupt countless indie studios. It would be extremely bad. So a lot of people bailed on Unity and they moved over to Unreal, and they announced their new games are coming in Unreal, and Unity lost all confidence with devs. So even though they walked a lot of that back because people freaked out, they just lost all confidence and trust with everybody, and so they just decided to move on. But they did it to themselves. You can't really blame people for moving away from them. CD, thank you for that. CD Media, the biggest issue is...
The industry needs Unreal devs. If people only worked on the Red Engine or Decima, they aren't replaceable if they leave. Getting everyone on Unreal is a staffing problem that studios are trying to solve.
Yeah, I think it will make talent more interchangeable, so it'll make it easier for devs to move from one studio to another because everybody will be familiar with the same tools. I think that will certainly help because, it's just everybody will not... You won't need to spend 6 months learning how to do your job before you can start doing your job. You'll be able to just get hired and start doing your job. And that's a big benefit. The other benefit of it being there is that, again, everybody, all the money and all the focus goes to this one platform, this one tool set. And so that tool set gets the collected benefit of all those companies' expertise, where CDPR can tell them, hey, we need this to make this game run better. And so they work on that. And then this other company comes in and says, hey, we're making a first-person shooter single-player game, Halo. And we need this done. And so Epic works on that and adds that to the engine. And so the hope is that everybody kind of works together and it makes the industry more simpatico, and everybody works together and makes it better and better. Hopefully that's what happens. What might happen is that all games start to look and feel the same, and all the problems that affected this one game affect all the other games. And so it's just a little hard to tell right now, but yeah, it's just what happens when there's not more competition. That's what happens. But I also don't blame devs, because running a game development studio is hard enough. Running a game dev studio and a software company to develop an engine at the same time is extra difficult. He took my thing.